Hey, what's up? Hope everyone's doing all right. So we are on week three out of 50. So remember, if you read the Bible in about 14 pages a week, and you can read the whole entire Bible in 50 different sections. So in 50 weeks, you go through the whole entire Bible. And so that's what we're doing. We're on week three. We're on the third week of the year, and we're reading the Bible all the way through, from cover to cover. And so we finished it last year, and so I forget when in December we finished it, but we read the whole entire Bible through, and I posted a video of every week of each reading, and so now we're on the third week's reading, and the third week's reading is Genesis 44 through Exodus 14, and so we round up Genesis and we're getting to Exodus. And so when we round up Genesis, or we round out Genesis, sorry, we're getting to the end of um, or you're getting to the end of Joseph's story, right? So Joseph is sold to the Egyptians. When he's sold to the Egyptians, he becomes really well known, and first one of his slave master's house, and they throw him in the jail, and then eventually he goes and he's well known into Pharaoh's house, and then the Pharaoh puts him in power over all the land. And when he's put in power over the land, he tells Pharaoh, there's going to be a famine for 7 years, and they need to store up food and grain for the 7 years. And so they store up food and grain. And because they store up food and grain, they are able to sell the food and grain for what they want. They end up taking all the different land from all the different Egyptians. So the Pharaoh owns it. And so he puts the people into the cities. And you have this really interesting dynamic where now the Egyptians and now Pharaoh owns all the people in the land. And so that ends up pretty much the end of Genesis. And then also you have uh, Jacob, he comes back and he's in Egypt now, and he talks about the 12 tribes. And then when he talks about the 12 different tribes of Israel, he says some things about each one of them, and not all good things that he says about the tribes. So I find that very interesting. And so that kind of ends up Genesis, and then Jacob, or Israel, he asked to that that the children bring his bones to the promised land when the time comes about. And I'm pretty sure they talk about how that they're going to leave Egypt and they're going to go to the promised land, a certain amount of time, and God will visit his people. And so that's the end of Genesis, and then you get to Exodus. And in Exodus, you have the history of Moses, and you have the history of the Jews leaving Egypt, and you have the history of God putting all of the plagues on the Egyptians, and with the mighty hand bringing out the Jews from the land. And this is to be had so that way this happens, or this is to be told so that people can always remember what God did, and for a long time. I would imagine at the time that it wasn't necessarily as obvious it is today that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God of the world. There's no other God like him. And so God shows this to the whole world through the Egyptians. And there's no doubt in anyone's mind after these plagues and after this event takes place of the children leaving Egypt, that there's only one God, and he's the only God, and he's the one that's in charge. And so I think about these things, and I think about all the different side things that are possible that could have happened at that time, but there's no way to really know. And so, like I said, like I always do, like I have a main theme for each day of the week that reflects on this reading. So that way, each day of the week, I kind of think about these things and I reflect upon them. And so for Monday, I have the Hebrews go to the land of Egypt. And so when the Jews first come to the land of Egypt, they're welcome. They have their own area, and they're welcome there, and the Jews like them, or I'm sorry, the Egyptians like them, and they're accepted. Obviously, after time goes by, excuse me, they're not accepted anymore. And I would imagine that one reason is that today I feel like history is distorted, and the reason I say that is that academia doesn't give any credit to God or to the Bible of why the historical events have happened in the past, and so academia is far away from the truth. And since it's far away from the truth, is also, I would imagine, far away from telling the truth of what history really is. So I would imagine at this time too, the powers that be, the Egyptians, also didn't have an accurate view of what history was, and they would lie to the people and tell the people an inaccurate view of history, so that way they can have power over the people, and the people didn't remember, why the Jews first came there, and what happened, and how Joseph saved the land, and so I would imagine that that happened, that happened now, and that happened in the past. Don't have any proof of that, no, just the evidence. Um, I like to say it's like, what is it? It's wisdom is my evidence, and wisdom is my evidence, and logic is my proof. And so I just feel like that's just kind of the evidence that I have. This seems to be what would happen. It's happened now, so it's probably what's happened then. And so, and then for Tuesday, I had God. I had God gives the name Israel to Jacob, and so I'm sorry, that was last week. I'm sorry. For Tuesday this week, it was new king who knows not Joseph, starts to oppress the Hebrews. So the new king who doesn't know Joseph starts to oppress the Hebrews, and I think that one reason he doesn't know Joseph is because the history has probably changed. Um, and so he doesn't know him, he doesn't understand, or he doesn't remember what's happened in the past, or he doesn't understand what's happened in the past. But regardless, he knows not Joseph, so he starts to oppress the people, and he starts to give them labor. It talks about how the people become like mightier than the Egyptians, and so they put the law of taskmaster over them because there's so many of them, and they become really mighty, and so that they don't rebel, they put the taskmaster over him. And because of this, the people cry out to God, and then God hears their cries. And so for Wednesday, I have Moses. And so when Moses comes into the scene, this is when the people are supposed to be like thrown into the river. The males are supposed to be thrown into the river, and they save Moses. And then the Egyptian queen adopts Moses as her child, and calls him Moses because she brings him out of the water. And so then Moses becomes this leader to the Jews, and this historical figure that has a lot of power and has a lot of interaction with God. And then as we see it in next week's reading, he talks to God quite a lot, and gets a lot of instruction from God, and leads the Jews in the wilderness, and they rebel against him several times. And you have this constant theme of rebellion against Moses, and so they rebel against Moses, and God has to show that Moses is in charge, and then they come back, and then they rebel again. But I would imagine that I was thinking about this, and I was wondering if the things that happen in the Bible, is it just like repetitive, so like things in history just happen over and over again, so that way we have the Bible as a history, and that's all the history that we need, because God knows that what man says it happens in the past, man's history is going to be lies, and so the God allows the Bible to stand true, and this is all the history that man needs to see what he should do. And so I think that these things are repeated, over and over again, with the people leaving and going to a new area, and God leading them into the new area, and just the different things that come about. And so when these things come about, when people go to a new area, that they can read the Bible, and they can say this happened in history as well, and they can study it, and they can learn from it, and hopefully not make the same mistakes. And also, if they kind of see patterns that are happening, then they can say, okay, look, God was with the Jews. The Jews didn't really know at this time, but you can see like this pattern that's happening. And so if God is with the Jews and this happened, so God could be with us too, even though it might not seem like God's with us because these things are bad that are happening. But they can see the pattern unfold that's happened in history, and in history God is with his people. And so I think this can bring, kind of comfort when things are happening. And then also you can study from the past, study from the Bible, these things are happening, and try to do better. Because like I said, it's almost certain that, history has been completely distorted. Academia's history, and so the only history that we really have is the Old Testament and the New Testament. But a lot of it's the Old Testament, so that's the history that we have. That's pretty much our history book. And without that, we wouldn't have a history. And so an accurate view of history. That's how I feel. It's like a completely wrong, but that's how I feel. So Thursday, I have God shows his wonders in Egypt and sets the people free. And so it's hard, sometimes it might be for some people, it's hard to say his wonders when he like killed all these people and all these horrible things happened, but it's still his wonders. And, kill the firstborn of the house, of every household. That's obviously, pretty tragic, but it's still God's wonders. And so when we think of wonders, we think of like kind of this land of wonders, like a kind of Peter Pan-esque land of the lost boys kind of reality. But wonders what language is and what words mean should be what the Bible says that they mean. And so you have like the word charity, and I use this one a lot. And so charity, you think of like giving away money to poor, to different organizations, but charity is a completely different thing that the Bible talks about in the New Testament. Charity is like a way of being. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave unseemly, thinketh no evil, is not easily provoked, rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, does not behave itself unseemly, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. And then, you know, he talks, this is like a charity, is like a way of being. It's not like giving away money to an organization. And so when we use the word charity, it could have multiple meanings, but we have to be able to understand what charity actually really means in the biblical sense. And so when God shows his wonders, we think of like a wonderland or something, like just kind of like this, like I said, like this fairy tale kind of land. But wonders is like a mighty thing that can happen, and there could be some negative things, or there's some you know, difficult things that arrive from wonders. And so, you know, God is powerful, and so, like, you know, you have to understand there's a lot of things that God does that's, it's very powerful, and there's a lot of power to it, and it can bring about destruction. And so God is wonder, God is mighty and powerful, and brings about destruction. And we just, you have to, I feel like, you know, when you think of a definition of a word or what a word means, we need to look at the biblical reference of what that is, and that's what the word means, not what it's been changed to in modern day society. So when you read these things in the Bible, it doesn't have the same truth to it because it's been changed in modern day to reflect a word or a view of reality that's just not accurate. And so for Friday, I had the Passover, and the Passover, you know, is when they killed the lamb and they put it on the doorpost so the angels would pass over them, so not to kill the firstborn. And this is a pretty intense event that happened, and it's something that the Jews did to remember what God has done for a long, long time. And so we're not Jews anymore, but we still have the history of what God wanted his people to do. And so we're not to do that anymore, but we still, I don't think so at least, but we still have an idea. It's still important for us to know how God treats his people in the past and what he expected of them when things happen. So that way, when things happen with us, we can know that God, you know, what level of expectation does God have for us, and what to do, and what is right and what's wrong. And we can have examples of that. So, yeah, so that is Exodus 44 through, Genesis 44 through Exodus 14. And I just finished reading, and you know, it's a good book to read. You know, I'm glad I'm reading the Bible page to page, or I'm sorry, from cover to cover, and page to page, cover to cover, cover to cover, and page to page. And I think like when you do this, you really have a good understanding of the Bible and a full context of what's actually happened. So I hope everyone's doing okay. God bless, and happy truth seeking.